Welcome to Lawyers.com Radio. Your legal solutions start right here. We'll help you understand your legal issues, find a lawyer in your area, and suggest legal forms for legal self-help.
Hi, and welcome back to Lawyers.com Radio. This is Matt Plessner speaking once again. In lieu of some recent events with a roller coaster at Six Flags Over Texas this summer, today we're going to be covering personal injury in relation to amusement park safety. We're going to talk about what this means, as well as how often it happens, and also what can be done about it. We're pleased to have with us Santa Ana, California attorney Chris Aitken of the Aitken Law Firm. Chris, we appreciate you being with us today.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Now, Chris, you've been a personal injury lawyer for quite some time now, and certainly have a lot of experience with the subject. Before we go on, can you please tell us, for those people who don't know, what is meant by personal injury in terms of law?
Well, personal injury is, a broad type of law that, in essence, whenever an injury happens, whether it be by auto accidents or amusement parks that we're talking about here, it basically gives a legal claim of action that you can collect for injuries. For instance, out here in California, you can collect under two types, economic and non-economic damages. And basically this gives you a legal recourse for the injuries that you sustained.
Well, thank you very much for enlightening us on this, Chris. Now let's talk about amusement parks now. What would you say, Chris, are the biggest amusement park dangers? And how common are injuries at amusement parks in general?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, basically the statistics tell us right now that over the last 20 years, meaning that when I say that is, these are actually reported incidents that they go to the emergency room. So that what that means in essence, we know that the problem is much greater. Interestingly enough, it's not always the biggest and fastest rides like we saw recently in Texas, but it does include those. But also we have to look out for the smaller ones. There's in essence 4,400 a year that is reported. Roller coasters, for instance, what they call the fixed rides, like we had out at Six Flags, or the litigation we're involved here in Orange County over Disneyland, that those only account for 10%. Interestingly, 20% are actually carousel rides that everyone here is familiar with, and due to falling dangers, and about 5% really go to bumper cars, and then there's certainly a wide variety of injuries on other amusement park types of rides, and the injuries vary from the less severe to the more severe.
Now, Chris, is there an assumption of risk when you go on any roller coaster or amusement park ride?
Well, there's not. I would answer it this way: a ride is supposed to perform as it is designed and supposed to be safe. There's certainly not an assumption of risk to go on to a ride that fails. I mean, the user of a ride does have to use common sense. They do have to follow directions. They do have to have their own responsibility to follow what the ride tells them to do. For instance, there's, as most people know, there are height restrictions. People commonly know you need to pull the bars down, etc., on these roller coasters. But that's not an assumption of risk. The ride operator and the amusement parks really do have to design their rides to be safe, and they have to perform as designed, or legal liability can incur.
What should most people be wary of in general at amusement parks, Chris?
Well, I think ordinary people really should be wary of and educated in all the warnings, the height restrictions, and really heed them accordingly. They should also be wary that most injuries do occur with children on rides. I mean, we all, I have 4 children myself. All his families go and use these amusement parks. They're really designed for families. And so we have a heightened use by children. And people really need to be aware and of the safety restrictions and the warnings, and make sure that their children are safe. That just because there's a ride and because it looks safe doesn't mean that it necessarily is. Certainly, you'd hope that the amusement parks have their own responsibility in making them safe. But there's also, I would look at it yourself and just make sure you do the common sense measures to make sure your children and yourself are safe.
Now, Chris, if something like this should happen, and of course, it sounds like with injury, it's everything from what happened to Six Flags Over Texas to a simple, maybe stubbed or broken toe on the fence or something like that. What kind of claim of action could be filed against the amusement park? And also, who's liable? Is it the workers, the owners, anybody else?
You know, the claim of action you file against amusement park is a straight personal injury cause of action. However, there are some special factors against amusement parks. There are certainly some certain issues you need to look at. I will say this, that the main, perpetrator, for lack of a better word, in an amusement park accident is the park itself. You can name the ride operators, for instance, individually. However, typically they are in the employment of the amusement park, so that will impute what they call vicarious liability, basically employer liability, so that the amusement parks are also liable for the ride operators. So you can name them separately, but at the end of the day, it is imputed to the amusement park itself.
Chris, after an injury occurs, what can people do for their own compensation? And also, what can they do to assist public safety?
Well, after an injury occurs, what they can do personally is really, contact an attorney. I would certainly recommend contacting one that has experience with amusement park, theme park safety. There are some special factors with amusement parks. There are special experts, for instance, that need to be retained that have expertise in amusement park rides. It is a specialty sort of industry. As far as what they do to help themselves, I mean, there is a big push, which we absolutely agree here in the amusement park industry, to report it. There's the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There's also a big push to have an electronic reporting system. So it's really, this can be shared. It really actually helps everybody in a sense as far as the reporting occurs. I will say that when we first started doing these amusement park rides, we were involved in a couple of the biggest tragedies that happen out here at Disneyland. We're here in Orange County, California. And I can tell you in the first one, with the sailing ship Columbia, that they didn't have reporting requirements, for instance, meaning that it was all handled internally. And because what happened with the Columbia Cleat accident here in Disneyland, it actually changed the law here in California, required reporting, and which actually assisted us with the fatality that happened at the Big Thunder Mountain that happened about 4 or 5 years earlier, where you actually had investigation that particular day, which actually preserved the evidence and gave us a lot of information to help the family that was involved in that particular case. So there is this is a very prevalent problem, and there's reporting that can be done, and we certainly encourage that.
And what can anybody do to prevent injuries, just so lawsuits can be avoided altogether?
I think there's a couple things. As I touched on before, I think that individuals can educate themselves on all the warnings and restrictions. I think what people are most familiar with are the height restrictions, for instance, and let's say for pulling down the bars over, let's say, on the fixed rides like the roller coaster rides. The carousels, they have protections, and as the studies show, carousels are one of the biggest perpetrators of injuries. Really educating themselves on the safety requirements and heeding them. The height restrictions, as an example, are really set up because of the design of the ride themselves. I mean, there is a lot that goes into the design of an amusement park ride, and I would certainly use common sense and ensure that you're following those restrictions, but also protect the ones that have a hard time protecting themselves, the children. I mean, that is where you see the greatest amount of injuries, and obviously the children will not have the same kind of safety consciousness that their parents would have, or that the people, their guardians, would have. So I would certainly protect the children and make sure you understand the rides that you're on, and take those warnings seriously, because they are there for a reason.
Well, thank you, Chris, for letting us know about all this. One final question for you. Are there particular laws and regulations of amusement parks? And if not, should there be?
That's a really good question. I will say that there are laws and regulations now. The amusement park industry, I would say, back in the late '90s, again, the accident that happened with the sailing ship Columbia that we're involved with at Disneyland really changed the amusement park consciousness on a national level. And because the reality is that the law and regulation of amusement parks are regulated statewide. So there is state law, and so what that means is what happens in Texas, for instance, with the Six Flags incident, may not be the same laws that apply potentially in California. I will say that, unfortunately, tragedy at times can cause advancements in the laws. So now, for instance, in California, we have laws because of the sailing ship Columbia accident that tighten up the government inspections, tighten up the maintenance, tighten up the ride operation, tighten up the training. But that's just a start. I think there should be more regulations and laws on a federal level. We're talking basically about a almost $14 billion industry. And we're talking about, the level of children and families that go into these parks, and the amount of people is staggering. So I think we do need heightened consciousness. I think we need to have more laws in amusement park safety on a federal level, so that all these are regulated appropriately to protect victims, such as what happened in Texas.
Well, Chris, once again, I want to thank you for taking some time with us today and talking about personal injury in relation to amusement park rides.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate your time.
I'm Matt Plessner, and thanks for listening to Lawyers.com Radio.
You've been listening to Lawyers.com Radio, where legal issues and solutions are always the topic of conversation. Whether you're an attorney or just someone trying to protect their legal rights, Lawyers.com Radio has the answer for you.